Wherever you find water, trees, minerals, you often find people too. We're all reliant on these and other natural resources to live well. For communities living close to them, this is both a boon and a curse. On today's show, let's visit the people most impacted by our increasing hunger for natural resources. Hello and welcome to Eco India. I'm Sanuta Raghu. Let's start in the coal mines of central India. A majority of the country still gets its electricity from the coal burned from mines like these. While policymakers and activists are caught in a deadlock over the development versus environment protection debate, communities who live close to these mines are having to face some devastating consequences. Our reporter traveled to their villages to find out more.
We can't really see anything except mines all the way up to the horizon. That's huge! So I'm here in India, where 2/3 of the electricity still comes from coal, which is considered the cheapest fuel. I want to find out its true cost. Korba district in central India is a major power hub and home to some of the biggest mines on the planet. Wow, everybody's got their faces covered because there's just so much dust. Can you feel it? It's all over my face. I spent a lot of days reading about coal and coal mining in this country, but seeing the mines on both sides of the road, all the way to the horizon, is a scale that you can't comprehend unless you're here. India is the second largest producer and consumer of coal in the world after China. And the demand for energy is rising faster here than anywhere else. Unlike in the US or the UK, where natural gas was found, India currently has no large-scale replacements for coal yet. With its abundant reserves and no major alternatives, coal remains the cheapest and easiest source of energy. And so extraction continues. In June 2020, the Prime Minister announced 41 new blocks spanning around 470 square kilometers of land would be open for mining. And in February 2021, the number stood at 75. But burning coal is already driving emissions dramatically up worldwide, and the pollution from the toxic smoke is now responsible for 1 in 5 deaths globally. Arguably, the most dire impacts of coal mining are local. I'm going to go meet communities that live around mines like this to understand the impact of coal on their lives. We're on our way to a village so remote that it's not even on the map. And in fact, it's not even a road. This is one among tens of thousands of villages that lie within India's mining belts. Around 2/3 of the region's inhabitants are tribal or indigenous. Kendai village is literally sitting on a mine that has hollowed out the ground beneath it. The 31 indigenous families here live with the consequences of their extreme proximity to a coal mine every day. Malmati is a member of the tribe here called the Pandu and was born in this forest. She wants to show me what has now happened to their source of fresh water. It's completely black, full of coal and ash.
This goes directly to our fields, and our crops don't grow. Nothing does. It's a huge problem. It just settles there, just like it has here.
The stream here is toxic, thick with the ash that remains after the extracted coal is washed, as well as with remnants of dynamite that was used to blast the ground. The coal mining company was asked to provide fresh piped water instead, but that is filthy too.
Even animals can't drink. How can we?
What happens if you drink it?
Everything hurts. We get headaches and fevers with this water.
While we were talking, things were getting heated up on the other side of the village. The people from the mining company have seen people with cameras come here, so they've come to inspect the water. And of course, the tribal community is very angry that they've only come today, and so things are getting pretty intense.
You have made an agreement with us, but you don't do anything.
What they want to explain is that this is the kind of water that they have to drink every day. So this boy is filling a bottle of water to send back with these representatives to their bosses, so they can visually see the kind of water that comes here and these people are forced to drink. So we went to the mine next door to give them a chance to respond to allegations of pollution and hear their side of the story. We had permission to film in the underground mine weeks before we went, but when we got there, they refused to speak to us or let us film. It's just really disappointing that we're not allowed in here. Coal-rich central India is home to some of the most biodiverse forests on the planet. So aside from local water and soil pollution, extracting coal, which is considered to be in national interest, also means destroying large tracts of old-growth forests. Even according to government estimates, 164,000 hectares of forest land have been lost to mining here since the 1950s. Millions of indigenous people live in these forests. The rush for coal and other natural resources is displacing communities here on an unprecedented scale. And this has remained largely underreported. I saw this story play out in every village I visited here. Some from the Gond community had already been displaced from their ancestral lands. Some from the Dhanuhar community were about to be displaced. And others believed their turn would come at some point. Ramesh Sharma is a renowned independent land rights activist who works to improve legal and institutional support for communities here, which are at the risk of losing their land to mining. We sat down for a chat about why the country is still investing in coal mining.
The reason why the number of coal mines has actually increased in an alarming rate over the past few years, because there's a massive urbanization, there's a massive demand for the power. But that's not an excuse, because again I would say that that depends on our consumption pattern, our whole consumerism. So if you are not really ready to listen, the people who are actually suffered, the people who are the victims, the people who are actually sacrificed for your power production, for getting 24/7 electricity in the big cities, we cannot say that some villages have to be live in the dark. So this is our moral responsibility to listen to all those people.
We contacted the coal ministry to address the allegations of the people we met in Korba. But they did not give us a date to be interviewed in the weeks before the publication of this piece. While we were still in the region, the community with the polluted water received some news they wanted to share. The community at Kendai have invited us for dinner tonight. The celebratory welcome they extended to us as visitors was in stark contrast to the news the village head, Jansai, wanted to share. This area has just been surveyed, and they have been notified that it will become an open-cast mine, which means that any day now, this community will be evicted from the forest.
This is my motherland where I was born. It was once so green. I remember the leopards, hyenas, birds, snakes. We were so happy then.
Of the 31 families here, 7 do not have entitlement deeds to prove they belong here. The government is responsible for rehabilitating those with papers. While mining has displaced people around the world, from Germany to Zimbabwe, the history of rehabilitation in India is especially poor. Since 1951, over 2.5 million people have been displaced by mines, and less than a quarter were rehabilitated.
Now the government is asking us to leave this place. Where will we go? We have worked on this land to make it fertile and sustain us. We don't want to be enemies. We only want to save this land.
In the morning, they led me into the forest to show me why they are adamant about not leaving this place. The Pandos use tools, including bows and arrows, to collect fruits from the forest. Their main source of nutrition is a kind of tuber they dig out of the ground. They are largely a self-sustaining community living off the forest.
Thank you, Bhaiya.
Driving through the coal belt, we saw defunct mines everywhere, where extraction once boomed, but now nothing remains but blots on the landscape. Wow, it's completely barren. There used to be 2 villages that were here before the mine came and set up about 22 years ago, and now the villages have gone and the mine has shut down. And there's nothing left here, no people, no forests, no coal. Mines normally have a lifespan of only a few decades. As the deeper you go, the less economical it becomes to operate them. So new ones open, while hundreds silently shut down across the country. This entire land behind me would have once been expansive forest, full of biodiversity, and home to a number of indigenous communities. When you factor in the social and environmental cost, coal doesn't seem so cheap anymore. This is the question we need to ask ourselves. Moving forward, how do we balance growth and the need for development with the health and rights of local communities and the environment?
Growth in the West was largely powered by fossil fuels. But if we want to avoid the most dire impacts of climate change, it's essential for the communities we just saw and for the planet as a whole that we find scalable alternatives to coal quickly. On our next story, our reporter contextualizes the history of coal and how it's likely to affect our future.
The story of coal begins 250 years ago, when British inventors realised you could heat water with coal to make steam, spin turbines, and power machines. Actually, let's rewind 300 million years before the steam engine, to carbon-rich plants that died in swamps. Millions of years of heat and pressure turned these fossils into rocks packed with energy. And back in the modern world, that energy was sorely needed. The Industrial Revolution created machines. Lots of them. It led to a global boom in prosperity that was unprecedented in human history. Governments built railways that linked coal mines to cities. That helped them feed factories and homes that were hungry for coal.
There were little to no alternatives, therefore it was very rational, it was very understandable, and it was not that controversial also.
This is Pao Yu Ui. He's an energy expert who studies how countries that have invested in coal can move to cleaner sources of energy.
For Europe, we can definitely say that there has been a very good side of coal throughout the 20th century. Economic prosperity came across the continent, as well as peace that went along with the European Union.
But the prosperity coal brings comes at a price. For more than half a century, scientists have known that burning fossil fuels releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and heats the planet. It's already warmed by more than 1 degree Celsius and is on track for a catastrophic 3 degrees by the end of the century. And coal is behind 40% of the CO2 that comes from burning fuels. But climate change isn't even the only problem. Dirty air kills more than 7 million people a year. Burning coal releases pollutants that get into your lungs and spread through your bloodstream, even reaching your brain. In the 1800s, doctors already knew that coal was bad for your health. Miners got sick from breathing in the dust. Cities were blanketed by fumes that crept into homes and made families cough. But governments had tied their economies to coal, and they weren't willing to give it up. Mining and burning coal damages the climate and hurts people's health. And that's why the UN has called to kick coal out of electricity by 2030 in rich countries and by 2040 for the rest of the world.
We need renewable energy and green jobs. No more fossil fuel subsidies or new coal-fired power plants.
So, how's that coming along? Well, global coal emissions have basically plateaued. In South America and Africa, coal was barely used in the first place. In the US and Europe, coal has been declining for decades. But across Asia, coal just keeps on growing. Last year, China and India burned more than 2/3 of all the coal that the world burned. The rest of the continent uses more coal than the EU and US put together. And the problem isn't even just the coal that's burning today. The new mines they're opening and power plants they're building are designed to run for decades. Now, some Southeast Asian countries cancelled plans to build coal plants last year, but India, for instance, wants to invest $55 billion in coal over the next decade. It needs to spend several times that on renewables to meet its targets. And then there's China. It burns half the world's coal but has pledged to slash carbon emissions to net zero by 2060. Here's what a report by 2 environmental research groups last November found out about that. To meet its climate goals, China must ban new coal-powered plants and double the electricity it makes from wind and solar.
They are not fully prepared to achieve that.
This is Shuwei Zhang, lead author of the report. He says that coal plants built today will become stranded assets that are unprofitable to keep running.
The most important things we need to stop the build of new assets, new fossil fuel assets, as soon as possible.
The industry disagrees.
The world may not like coal, but the world needs coal.
This is a speech by the boss of the World Coal Association in September 2020.
But this is not about being liked or popular, it's about being realistic.
The industry argues that it can make coal clean by sucking CO2 out of power plants and storing it in the ground. But the technology it's banking on is expensive and doesn't exist at scale yet. Each year the world can capture about 40 megatons of CO2 from industrial sites. Annual carbon emissions are hundreds of times bigger. So how can countries quit coal? And can China and India learn from the West's mistakes? Let's look at the US. Coal has been declining there for decades because of cheap alternatives like oil and gas. And now wind turbines and solar panels are making it fall even faster. The US closed 36 coal plants last year and has cut its capacity by 25% in the last decade. But politicians kept telling coal workers that their future was safe.
You'll get another job. You won't mine anymore. Do you like that idea? They said, no, we don't like that idea. We love to mine. That's what we want to do. I said, if that's what you want to do, that's what you're going to do.
Trump's moved on, but he wasn't alone.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared.
The Treasurer knows the rule on crops.
It's coal.
Scientists have a problem. Governments need to quit coal to keep us safe. But they also need to protect the livelihoods of communities who live from it. That's what Germany did. It closed its final hard coal mine in 2018 after 60 years of steady decline, and did so without firing a single miner. The government retrained younger miners and paid out older ones who wanted to retire early. But scientists say the energy transition needs to be fair and fast. Germany dragged out its transition over decades, and even last year it was still building plants to burn more coal. Researchers at the Technical University of Berlin in 2019 found that a quicker phase-out would have cost less and let mining communities adapt better.
Clinging on for too long with an old dying industry has a tendency not to support new alternative industries because these are being seen as a kind of competition that might speed up the process.
So what can coal-hungry countries like India, where more than 700,000 people work as miners, take away from this? Well, politicians should be honest with voters that coal's era is over and set a clear end date. Then they could stop subsidizing coal companies and put the money into retraining workers in new sustainable industries for them and their families.
Not figuring out a plan B is indeed the worst thing we can do at this moment. A local radio station in Uttarakhand is already helping with this. The state is prone to catastrophic flooding and forest fires. Kumaon Wani, or the Sound of Kumaon radio station, is connecting communities to discuss and tackle the most difficult environmental problems in the region. Our reporter visited them to find out more.
Rocky mountains and remote villages abound in the Indian state of Uttarakhand. For the residents here, TV and internet connections are practically non-existent. A few years ago, Kumaon Wani, a community-run radio station in the hills of Mukteshwar, decided to do something about it.
Ready?
The station's manager, Mohan Singh Kharki, and his team produce a program that's broadcast to around 500 villages.
The radio is our platform. If there are problems within our communities, we try to find solutions within these same communities. When someone shares a problem they are facing on our program, then we can find solutions there as well. If locals don't phone in with suggestions, then we speak to experts who help listeners with solutions and advice.
And advice is in hot demand here, especially when it comes to farming. Agriculture is the primary source of income for the 350,000 residents in this region. But the state is becoming increasingly vulnerable to earthquakes, floods, landslides, and water scarcity as a result of poorly planned construction projects that are ill-suited to mountainous terrains. The state's burgeoning hospitality industry has put even more stress on rivers and lakes. This has triggered a water crisis in villages like Mukteshwar. The crisis has made Kumaon Wani's educational programs on farming and climate change all the more welcome. 35-year-old Jitendra Raikwal produces Kumaon Wani's broadcasts. He takes great care to tailor the show to the needs of his audience, often reaching out to experts.
One of our listeners called in and told us that the government is building expensive cement tanks. This is a wasteful public policy decision in an already geologically sensitive area. Farmers using polythene is another big problem.
Local farmers, especially those who engage in step farming and who use canal and ridge systems to divert the flow of water to their fields, are feeling the impact of these shortages. The total land area dedicated to agriculture is reportedly shrinking as well. Kumaon Wani producer Jitendra Raikwal also works as a farmer. He's witnessed the devastating effects of water scarcity firsthand.
The impact of water scarcity on nature can be seen in our fields and gardens. Older trees have been completely destroyed. There are newer plant varieties that are flourishing, but they are too expensive for locals. Farmers with small plots are forced to sell off pieces of their land as a last resort, or they're selling one or two canals. Some people have even started selling off all of their land.
Krishan Singh Bargale also tunes into Kumaon Wani regularly. The farmer recently learned from the radio station that a solution made out of lime and water, which local calls chuna, can actually help protect his apple trees from getting infected with bacterial diseases known as apple blisters.
Earlier, when we would have trouble with our trees, we would have to travel to Pantnagar, almost 100 kilometers away. Now we get information from Kumaon Wani radio station, and we use that for our benefit. Who else would have told us how to fix it? Fortunately, I got information from the radio and was able to revive my plants myself.
After airing a program about the impact of excessive pesticide and insecticide use, the radio team noticed changes in local farming practices.
So today people use minimal amounts of chemicals in the crops they grow. If you visit the fields today, you will see that many farmers understand the harmful side effects of the chemicals in insecticides.
A big challenge for the radio is funding. Grassroots issues don't attract commercial advertisers. Nevertheless, they managed to get some public funding and support from NGOs. Despite these challenges, the non-profit radio station has not only helped reduce environmental problems, it's also had a huge impact on the life and work of hundreds of villagers in the Nainital district.
People power communities, and communities make the planet we live on. I hope today's show has given you some context to how our choices of consumption can affect the lives of others in different parts of the world. I'll leave you with that thought and see you again next week. From our entire team in India and Germany, goodbye and thanks for watching.
जिंदाबाद